7:46. Good morning to you. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne on your TV, on your radio, online as well.
Shall we take a look at today's front pages? The Times leads on the National Grid's warning, saying the UK could face rolling winter blackouts if it doesn't import enough energy from Europe.
The Guardian also leads on power cuts, but highlights how the lives of those who use life-saving machines could be put at risk. I mean, that's the issue. If you've got one of those medical machines at home, what do you do?
The Daily Mail also goes with winter blackouts, saying families are being offered £10 a day to cut electricity at peak times.
And the Eye gives an overview of what winter blackouts could mean for the UK.
Daily Express front page says homes face 3-hour winter power cuts. But it is worth saying here that even though the newspapers are saying that blandly in those huge headlines, it's only the worst case scenario of a worst case scenario if you read the smaller print.
Yeah. Paul says having planned blackouts will only serve the criminal element. Alarms and CCTV will all fail, thus leaving it wide open for thieves and looters. CCTV would, alarms wouldn't. They've got battery backups.
Yes.
So the alarms would be all right, but I get your point.
And we were asking about whether it costs more, because somebody earlier was saying it costs more, actually, if you're turning on and off the lights. Henrik says, I am an electrician. It costs £0 more at the switching stage, so no more, except in lamps which are designed to emit heat. Central heating is different because it obviously costs more from stone cold rising to hot, whereas leaving it on consistently with the room start on a very low temperature is cheaper. So turning your lights on and off, according to Henrik, no, that doesn't take any more energy.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. Let's go through the papers in a bit more detail with former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and senior reporter for the I newspaper, Benjamin Butterworth. Claire, let's start with the Daily Mirror. She's really looking at mortgages.
Yes, I mean, this is the sort of ongoing saga of mortgages and the rates that they're going to go up. And I thought it was quite interesting that the guest you just had on was sort of saying, let's all not panic so much. And of course, in the Mirror, we have panic. House prices to slump by 8%, mortgages set to a 20-year high. I mean, I think that we do need to perhaps have a little bit of perspective.
There's always people moan when the house prices keep going up.
Yeah.
So an 8% slump would be good for first-time buyers.
How much of all of this is the media's fault, is actually overplaying it?
So say, just looking at Benjamin then.
Well, yeah, so, but if you look at the front pages, as I said earlier, you would be convinced that there will be winter blackouts this winter, and yet that's not what anyone actually is saying in the smaller print.
I mean, I think the fact that it's a prospect and it was said by the National Grid justifies the concern and the coverage. But on the point of house prices, you know, you heard during the COVID period, which was obviously very unpredictable, at the start of the lockdowns and the serious point of COVID, house prices did fall a bit. There were some not quite bargains, but some good deals to be had. But actually, they continue to rise pretty consistently. And so, you know, as someone who would like to buy a house, who's not yet a homeowner and lives in a very expensive part of the country, London, you know, I'd be quite glad of an 8 to 10% fall. And the market's completely out of control. The idea that, you know, in the 70s, it was 4 times the average income to buy a house, and now it's 20 times in parts of the country is utterly ludicrous. Yeah,
and I think
of course it is. Think about the cost of a house in London.
But I think it's also part of the problem that we've all got used to having an availability of mortgage offers and also cheap money. Let's all be honest, the interest rate has been so artificially low for some time that we've all got very used to that fact. And lenders just allowing you to spend much more than you can realistically afford on a property.
I thought we'd learned this lesson after the last crash.
And you'd think so. And I think we learnt it for a very short period of time. And now we're coming back round to that again. And interest rates are going up to perhaps what they should be and what would normally be a normal sort of interest rate. And I think that we've all got so used to it being quick, available and cheap that we've lost sight of the fact that this is, you know, this is a big purchase. And I think the law of supply and demand will state that house prices are not going to fall by as much as everybody thinks.
No,
there may be some change.
They never do very much.
They don't. I think there's a small variation, but I mean, what's more concerning is we're not building enough houses. And people who want to get on the property ladder are just not going to have that because of the available stock and the availability of mortgages. So I think we're talking ourselves into a little bit of a frenzy, I think. And yes, it's right to be wary of these kind of costs and the impact that it has on people, but I think that we ought to fall much shorter of saying this is woeful, this is awful, you know, using the word slump and things like that. I think we all have to be a little bit careful. The semantics of it are really, really important. We don't want to frighten people, as you say, Anne, with all of the front pages saying we
Doom,
will
gloom and
return.
disaster.
But it's only worst case scenario.
Well, let's have some what could be positive news, Benjamin, in The Guardian this morning, saying the weather forecast gives us at least the hope of potentially lower bills.
Yes, now a bit like Anne's warning earlier, it's hard to predict these things. So the University of Reading, which has done this weather forecast...
Well, they're huge on climatology and stuff, aren't they?
Yeah, but they caveat it with how it's difficult to predict months in advance. But what they're saying is that it's very unlikely that we're going to have a very cold winter like the one we had in 2009-10, which apparently was the coldest of recent years. They say that it might get quite cold in November, December, and then be milder through the latter part of winter next year. And the reason this matters so much is because it's going to save people an awful lot of money if it's a milder winter than a colder winter. In fact, they predict that it's cost £1 billion per degree colder it gets. On national energy bills. So, you know, that's a pretty huge difference on what people's cost is going to be.
Hooray for global warming, then.
Yeah, exactly. It's finally paid off. You get a lovely tan in summer and you can afford you might, well, probably can't afford your energy bills in winter. But I think that'll, you know, if that happens, that'll be a relief to people. But at least if they've got this prediction, they can try and plan out when they might put the heating on, because I've not put my heating on yet. But if they say November and December is going to be the only proper cold spell, well, maybe you can justify putting it on for that period.
Talking of the blackouts, that was across all the papers this morning. Francis, I need to do some research into this. Francis says, I installed UPS, uninterruptible power supply devices, when I was living in rural areas to power the TV and broadband, as we used to get occasional outages.
Isn't that when the generator kicks in?
This also maintained telephone and emergency alarms. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, an uninterrupted power source is basically a generator that's programmed to come on if it needs to. It comes on straight away. You don't have to already do it.
Yeah, we use them a lot in computer data centres because you can't have your
So it's going to be expensive then?
I don't know. I mean, it'll be.
Well, you've got to have a generator, I
find
suppose.
out. Yes, you've got to run a generator.
You've got to keep that primed and everything, so everything's...
Which is not quite so simple if you're living in an apartment block or...
No, exactly. I think if you're in a rural cottage somewhere, you can.
You would have the space to be able to do it. It's a really interesting thought, though, that people are now going to that way of thinking that they need to have their own sources of energy coming through. But obviously, if it's a generator, is that being run off of diesel, petrol, that kind of thing? The cost of that isn't exactly cheap.
I know that right. The dish in Australia, the one that provided the television pictures for Apollo 11 when it landed.
Oh,
the dish. In the movie, I don't know whether this was ever true, in the movie they suddenly run out of power because they have a power blackout just as Neil Armstrong's about to get out onto the moon. And they are the ones that have to deliver the picture back to Earth. And so they have to rely on their UPS, their universal, what is it? Uninterrupted power source, which is a generator.
Oh, right. Oh, well, there you go. You learned something.
But that's in the middle of nowhere in Australia. I don't know whether, as you say, it would work in a multi-storey block.
No,
in a city in London or something.
It's back to the doom and gloom in the Star, Claire, because nurses are getting a pay rise of...
72 pence, according to the Star. I mean, I think this is all part of the wider conversation about the RCN polling their members for strike action.
For the first time in how many years?
106 years.
Wow.
I mean, it is quite serious, but I have a little bit of a problem. This is not going to surprise you with strikes. I don't agree with it. I don't think the RCN need to be looking at strike action when what they want from the government is 5% above inflation increase, which takes it to a pay increase of 17%.
That isn't going to happen.
No, it's not.
It's not, and I think that you have to be realistic. I don't think that people shouldn't get a pay rise. I think that nursing staff and care staff definitely do deserve to have a good salary. But to have an unrealistic amount like that, I think you're just asking for failure, and you're asking for people then to take sides, and it becomes a very divisive argument, and I don't think it helps that.
Could this be the strategy, simply to get us talking more about it?
And if that is their strategy, then that's a good one.
It's working.
It's a good one, it's working, we're all talking about it and we're all paying attention to it. But it's where you draw the line as to where public sympathy will run out, as it has done with train strikes and drivers striking. Everyone's sort of going, well, hold up a second, we supported you in the first 2 strikes, now we're down to the 7th or 8th. You can stop, I've had enough. And that's always the worry that you have, is it's going to push too far and the argument turns against you.
Well, of course, that's what's happening with the railway tomorrow. They're on strike again.
Yeah, only 1/5 of trains will be running tomorrow because the RMT, which is 40,000 workers and 15 train networks, are going on strike, and they'll only be running between 7:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. So train bosses have said don't travel unless absolutely necessary, but which is clearly a huge disruption, and there'll be people that will miss vital appointments, family, moments, all those sorts of things. But I actually disagree with Claire, because the public support for the train strikes has been much higher than you would have anticipated. When Grant Shapps, who was the Transport Secretary earlier this year, sort of tried to play games over it, actually the public were largely on side, which surprised many. And of course they are, because everyone is facing a cost of living crisis. People on decent incomes as well as low incomes can't pay their bills, and so when the train staff, and it's not the train drivers asking for the rise, it's other staff, but when they turn around and say we can't afford to pay our bills and raise our kids, actually a lot of people respond and say, yeah, that's a pretty rubbish situation.
All right, well, look, we need to leave it there. You two, thank you both very much indeed. We'll catch up with you, Claire and Benjamin, a little bit later on. Thank you.
Lots more to come in a couple of moments.